Generations are very different. And today we're going to describe every generation, starting with the greatest generation. Members of the greatest generation really had a weird life. Imagine growing up during the roaring 20s, listening to jazz music, watching prime Charlie Chaplin, and enjoying a good economy, only to be bitch slapped by the Great Depression. At least they didn't have to fight in World War I, and they instead got to fight in World War II, which is so much better. Respect these people. Their fight is the reason you are able to bed rot in your room the entire day. The silent generation. Silent generation is tiny. Because when the economy is collapsing and there is a world war going on, people have less time to make babies. Imagine shit like this being your childhood. It's depressive, so let's just move on. Baby boomers. Boomers are definitely the most spoiled generation in recent times. As they were born during the post-World War II economic boom in Western countries, they had a much easier lifestyle than their predecessors. With that being said, this was the time of the Cold War, and this meant that American boomers were sent off to boom in Vietnam, and that shit was scary. So scary, in fact, that it led to the most popular trend of the 60s, the hippies. Essentially, hippies were a worldwide weed enthusiasts. But all of that has passed, and today boomers are old, which doesn't matter, because they still hold the most power, have the most money, and they might even lead us into World War III. We should really bring back the OK Boomer meme. Generation X. Generation X should be called the silent generation. While boomers are in a constant shouting match with millennials and zoomers, Gen X just watches from the sidelines, and they are enjoying themselves because they grew up during the 80s, which had to be so much fun, as the 80s are probably the most romanticized decade in history. Gen Xers entered their adulthood during the 90s, which, depending on where you lived, was either the best thing ever or a complete nightmare scenario. As to what Gen X gave us, we have rap, but we also have people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. So, you know, you win some, you lose some. Millennials. Life of millennials started out great, but then it slowly got worse. They grew up during the 90s, and again, this either meant playing on your Super Nintendo after school or having to look at your country collapse in real time. Then came the wild early internet, with millennials being the ones to experience it firsthand. All of this maybe sounds fun, but as the late 2000s approached, and with most of millennials entering their adulthood looking for jobs, it was time for the biggest economic crash since the Great Depression. This meant that, unlike their boomer parents, millennials could only afford to rent a nice cardboard box. Couple that with all the shit that was happening in the world at the time, and you can see why they went a little bit crazy. And how do you cope with the world going to shit? You start dressing up as a hipster, get a weird haircut, open up a burger place, and start eating avocado on a toast. At least we can thank them for building early YouTube. Gen Z. While millennials were the first ones to use the internet, us zoomers are the first ones to grow up on it. This had its upsides and its downsides. The upside is that we are the most connected generation ever, while the downside is that we are the most disconnected generation ever. But I don't care. The internet during the early and mid 2010s was awesome. However, similar to millennials, we also had a defining moment at the end of the decade, the COVID pandemic. It impacted the entire world, but it especially fucked up zoomers a lot. In my case, I had to finish middle school during lockdown, and in my freshman year of high school, I barely even went to classes because everything was online. This meant our social life went down the toilet. And with the rise of AI, who the hell knows which jobs will be eaten up and which ones will survive? We may think millennials are cringe, but we share the same suffering fate. Generation Alpha. Generation Alpha is the first generation to be born into the world dominated by the internet and mobile phones. While millennials got their first phones in their 20s and zoomers in their childhood, Gen Alpha kids get a nice iPad as soon as they spawn. How well that's gonna turn out? Not much, probably. Couple that with all the mass-produced AI slop on social media right now, and yeah, The kids are cooked. Generation Beta. Imagine being born as a fucking beta. They are barely a few months old and their life already sucks. Thank you for watching. Subscribe.